top Department of Justice official during the George W. Bush administration. During his confirmation hearings, Wray pledged his independence. He repeatedly told the Senate panel he would not be pulling his punches in the position and that he would resign if he was ever asked to do something illegal or immoral. CNN will continue to follow that vote. Be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Jake Tapper, or you can tweet the show at The Lead CNN. We do actually read them. Be sure to tune in to CNN this evening for a special CNN town hall. Al Gore, the climate crisis. Anderson Cooper will join the former vice president, and that all starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN. That's it for The Lead. I am Jake Tapper. I now turn you over to one Mr. Wolf Blitzer, who happens to be right next door. Expressed many concerns with President Trump, not only on policy, but also just basic human decency. He says conservatives have been complicit in the rise of Trump and Trumpism.
Well, I think that's true. But listen, I always thought August was going to be make or break time for people like Jeff Flake, who are reluctant to support Trump. We have to remember Flake didn't go to the convention. He's never been, a pro-Trump Republican. But Republicans were willing to give Trump time to see if he could pass major, efforts like repealing Obamacare, like tax reform. And now we're at August, where people have to go home and talk to their constituents and also consider how they're going to position themselves for 2018 campaigns. So throughout this month, you will see more people than Jeff Flake figure out how to position themselves, and I think you see a battle emerging of who is to blame for the lack of accomplishments. You saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the podium today sort of blaming the Republican Congress. You saw Jeff Flake here blaming Trump. Who's going to win that fight will be very important to see going forward.
Abby, let's turn to the bombshell from your newspaper today, the Washington Post, reporting that not only did President Trump sign off on that initial misleading statement from Donald Trump Jr., he dictated it. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders from the podium took issue with the idea of a dictation, but did acknowledge that the president weighed in. It was a misleading statement. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders said it wasn't. Here is the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, talking before the story came out about whether or not President Trump had a hand in it.
The president didn't sign off on anything. He was coming back from the G20. The statement that was released on Saturday was released by Donald Trump Jr., and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyers. The president wasn't involved in it. I wasn't involved in the statement drafting at all, nor was the president. I'm assuming that was between Mr. Donald Trump Jr., between Don Jr., and his lawyer. I'm sure his lawyer was involved. That's how you do it. But I do want to be clear that the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement.
I mean, obviously, Jay Sekulow was either not telling the truth or, I think more likely, had not been told the truth.
And I think that it's important to note that on some of those occasions, he volunteered that the president wasn't involved in drafting it, which I think reflects how damaging this revelation really is for them. It suggests that Trump was the person who wanted to pull back from full transparency. Our reporting basically states that there were other lawyers and advisors involved who knew that more information would come out that would make a less than fulsome statement seem evasive and like an effort to cover something up. So they wanted to put it all out there. The president was the one who overruled them. And that's the critical decision-making point here. You can call it dictating, you can call it weighing in, you can call it whatever you want. The question is, who decided not to say what happened that day, and who decided to put out a statement that eventually was proven to be categorically false? The meeting was not about Russian adoptions. It was about damaging information on Hillary Clinton, and that's the reason that the meeting ended up on Don Jr.'s calendar.
And Paul, I mean, you and I are old dogs, and we've seen a lot of people come in and out of this town. Get it all out on your own terms, get it all out as soon as possible.
Right, and according to the reporting in Abby's paper, the president was advised that, and it is true. Everything comes out. Believe me, I've lived through this. Everything comes out. Stuff you never want to know about comes out. So go ahead and say it. If in fact it was benign, but it wasn't about adoption, say it. And it's really telling that according to the sources that the Post has, the president was advised to be completely transparent and go ahead and put it all out, and he decided not to. That's a huge problem. It's not a crime to lie to the Washington Post, okay? It isn't.
Or to lie to the public is really what it is.
It is lying to the public, and that is terrible, but that's not obstruction of justice, but it is a cover-up. It is. He was clearly directing a cover-up of what happened in that meeting. Let's say it was about adoption, even though we now know it was a meeting with Russian agents to seek dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Sarah?
I just want to raise one other point here. It is also legally problematic to use taxpayer resources to not only protect your son from legal trouble, but to protect him from activities he conducted on behalf of a campaign. That gets into Hatch Act violations. If he brought other federally paid staff into that discussion and used their resources aboard Air Force One to protect his son from campaign activities that are getting him in trouble, that opens up a whole other door to problems not only for Trump, his family, but staff as well.
Abby, I mean, as Sarah Huckabee Sanders said today, the president weighed in on the statement, quote, like any father would. I'm not sure if that's true, but...
I'm not sure that that's true, and it's certainly not true in the context of a criminal investigation. I mean, I think this is... Ultimately, if we take a step back here, that's what this is about. This is a criminal investigation that involves him and his family. And there were attorneys involved who advised him not to do this, and the president did not take that advice. It reflects the idea that a lot of people around him do not believe that he's fully cognizant of how serious this all is at the end of the day.
Amanda, Abby, Paul, thanks one and all. Appreciate your being here. President Trump tested by foreign powers, finding no easy answers as Russia flexes its military muscle on the border of key U.S. allies, and North Korea pushing the nuclear limits. That story ahead. Your book, the subtitle is A Rejection of Destructive Politics and a Return to Principle. You just talked about some of the principles that you think conservatives need to get back to. Let's talk about the rejection of destructive politics, because you're quite critical in the book, and also you have been critical in real life about some of the things that President Trump has said. His mockery of a disabled reporter. I could go on, but it's only an hour-long show. What do you think political leaders need to do when he does things that are indecent?
Well, let me just say, this didn't start with President Trump.
Absolutely not.
I was in the House from 2001 to 2012, 13. During that time, we had a Republican stand up during President Obama's State of the Union and yell, "You lie," that famous episode. We've seen things like this, and I talk about in the book when Gabby Giffords got shot. A year later, she came back during the State of the Union. She was going to resign the next day. And I sat with her, and she couldn't stand on her own still at that time, and so I helped her up during the President's applause lines, President Obama's applause lines. I started getting texts and emails from Republicans saying, "Why are you standing? The President is speaking. Do you agree with the President?" And just this shirts versus skins attitude that really predates President Trump. But I think we've just gotten coarser and coarser. And I talk a lot about it in the book, things like the birtherism that was put forward. I think that was awful.
By President Trump, mainly. He was one of the biggest proponents of it. He was one of the sheriff in Arizona was Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Sure. Sent investigators to Hawaii. Yeah. And then had a press conference after he was defeated, still saying it was a forged birth certificate. This was in December of last year. A terrible thing to do and to prolong. And I think that the rejection of destructive politics, we've got to reject that. And it, as a conservative, I mean, that's just not what conservatives should do. And I mean, we've got huge problems to solve in this country. The biggest, in my view, is our looming debt and growing deficit. We have $20 trillion in debt. We'll be over $1 trillion a year in deficits here coming up soon. And we know that the only way to solve that is for both parties to sit down and share the risk. Every decent budget agreement we've had in the past 40 years is when Republicans and Democrats, you know, Reagan and Tip O'Neill, or the Graham-Rudman-Hollings Act, or budget deal of 1997, when Republicans and Democrats have said, all right, let's share the risk and do it together. And to say you're conservative and then say, I'm not even going to deal with entitlement spending, we'll put that off. We can't do that anymore. And we've got to sit down, Republicans and Democrats. You need 60 votes in the Senate to do just about anything if you're not under reconciliation. And we're going to be there soon, and we should keep that. The President is calling for us to get rid of the filibuster. That would be an awful thing. The Senate is at its best when we work together on these things. So your being outspoken doesn't come with a potential price. President Trump has reportedly been talking with people about getting challengers, Republican challengers, to run against you. Politico is reporting the White House officials have met with at least 3 possible primary challengers against you. You're running for re-election next year. How worried are you that doubling down on your outspokenness on these issues with this book might cost you your political career?
Well, I think some things are more important than a political career. I think, yeah, it would have been probably politically smarter to wait until you're safely re-elected to write a book like this. But then it wouldn't mean as much. If you don't have anything to risk politically, it doesn't mean as much. And I felt that it was important enough to stand up and write this. And so I've done it.
And there are critics out there on your left who say,
Right.
talk is cheap, writing this book is one thing, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do?
Well, like I said, I've reached across the aisle. I've worked on the so-called Gang of 8 when I first came to the Senate.
On immigration
I spent a lot of
reform.
time. Yeah, and we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to sit down together. I partnered with Tim Kaine to do a bipartisan AUMF, authorization for use of military force. To prove that Republicans and Democrats can get along, I marooned myself on an island with Martin Heinrich, a Democrat senator from New Mexico, to rival survival to show that Republicans and Democrats can get along if death
You worked
is
with
the only
Democrats
option.
on Cuba, too, with
Yes,
the Obama administration.
I have. And I have agreed with President Obama on Cuba policy. I've disagreed with this president. And one thing that I should point out, too, I came to Congress, in 2001, disagreed with President Bush on No Child Left Behind, prescription drug benefit, disagreed with him for 8 years on Cuba policy. And yet, a couple of months ago, he came to Arizona and did a fundraiser for me because we agreed on most issues and worked together on most issues. We've got to get away from this attitude that you have to agree with the president and that a senator should be a rubber stamp for everything the president wants at all times. I will agree with this president when I think he's doing conservative things and doing decent things, and I'll oppose him and speak up when I think that he isn't. And I think that's what Arizona voters expect me to do.
The book is Conscience of a Conservative by Senator Jeff Flake. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Don't go before you sign my copy. Thanks so much, Senator. Coming up, a big election, and now opposition leaders snatched from their homes in the dead of night, rampant violence, and more chaos in oil-rich Venezuela. We're going there live. Stay with us.
Choose to go.
So in response to that, the acting administrator of the Drug Enforcement Agency sent an email to all of his agents that reads, in part, "In writing to you, I seek to advance no political, partisan, or personal agenda, nor do I believe that a special agent or task force officer of the DEA would mistreat a defendant. I know that you would not, so why do I write? I write to offer a strong reaffirmation of the operating principles to which we as law enforcement professionals adhere. I write because we have an obligation to speak out when something is wrong. That's what law enforcers do." I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thanks for being with me. The Lead with Jake Tapper starts now.
A major admission from the White House just now. President Trump, quote, weighed in on that misleading statement from Donald Trump Jr. about his meeting with the Russians. The Lead starts right now. Amid all that, one lawmaker's searing indictment of his own party, Senator Jeff Flake speaking his mind and then some, railing against President Trump, saying his GOP colleagues are in denial. But will Flake's words lead to any real action? Senator Flake will join us live this hour. Two potentially explosive crises overseas. One, a stark warning of war, as Senator Lindsey Graham paints a terrifying picture of the dwindling options with a nuclear North Korea. Then, what in the world is Russia up to near the border of several NATO countries, and why is Putin stockpiling so much military gear there? And then, is this the ultimate fake news tale? A new lawsuit alleging the White House may have helped concoct a huge fake news story along with Fox News, exploiting crackpot conspiracy theories and smearing a young murdered DNC staffer. But can the details of this lawsuit be believed?
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to The Lead, and we begin with breaking news in our money lead from Wall Street. Let's take a live look at the big board where the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed just shy of an all-time high of 22,000. The Dow, as well as the NASDAQ and S&P, has hit record highs in July despite turmoil in Washington and international tensions. excuse me, the president tweeted about the Dow this morning saying, quote, stock market could hit all-time high again. 22,000 today, was 18,000 only 6 months ago on election day. Mainstream media seldom mentions, exclamation point. And that brings us to our politics lead. In the former Soviet Republic of Georgia today, Vice President Pence promised that President Trump would sign into law very soon the tough new sanctions on Russia that Congress passed overwhelmingly and delivered to the White House last Friday.
And in a further sign of our commitment, very soon President Trump will sign legislation to strengthen and codify the United States sanctions against Russia.
Pledges like that notwithstanding, Senate Republican sources tell me that they are concerned that President Trump might not sign the sanctions into law, though their worries are assuaged given the fact that they have enough votes to override were the president to veto the measure. And even if the president does nothing at all and just lets the bill sit, it will become a law in 10 days automatically. The president's seeming ambivalence on the Russian sanctions is intriguing, coming alongside a deafening silence, as it does, from President Trump about Moscow's recent retaliation to those same sanctions. President Vladimir Putin's order that the U.S. eliminate 755 staffers from the U.S. diplomatic mission there, the most aggressive move by the Kremlin against Washington since the final years of the Cold War. In the past few days, since the move by Putin, the president has had plenty to say about the news media, about Republican senators, about Democratic senators, and more. But the president has had nothing to say publicly about Putin or that move. Nor has the president had anything public to say today about a different Russia-related story. The Washington Post scooped that President Trump, quote, personally dictated that initial misleading statement from his son Donald Trump Jr. when first asked about that June 2016 campaign meeting with the Russians. We now know that the encounter happened because an associate of Donald Trump Jr. offered to get him a meeting with a Russian government lawyer who was promising incriminating information about Hillary Clinton. But that initial statement about the meeting was misleading. It suggested that Trump Jr. and the lawyer had, quote, primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children, unquote. Now, that statement did not mention the purpose of the meeting and had to be updated after the New York Times obtained more evidence about the meeting and offered many more details. The Times had reported, of course, that President Trump personally signed off on that misleading statement, which at the time, one of the president's attorneys told me was not true. The New York Times also reporting that the president personally signed off on the original statement that Donald Trump Jr. issued on Saturday, that one that required a follow-up clarification because it didn't disclose the idea of opposition research.
Yeah, that's not true. First of all,
the president did not sign off on that statement.
The statement was issued by Donald Trump Jr. The president was on the return from his trip to the G20. Again, these are stories that are out there. People can say anything they want, but the fact is that's just not true.
Today, however, we found out from the Post that the president did more than look at Don Jr.'s misleading statement. He dictated it against the advice of his advisors, who favored a fuller disclosure about the meeting, suspecting that all the information was going to come out anyway, which it did. Now, asked for comment just a few minutes ago, the White House press secretary acknowledged what the president's lawyer denied, acknowledging that the president did play a role in the drafting of that misleading statement.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
To be clear, of course, the statement that Don Jr. issued, that was dictated by the president, according to the Post, was misleading. It did not even remotely acknowledge the purpose of the meeting, which was Donald Trump Jr. wanting to meet someone billed as a Russian government lawyer with one specific purpose: to obtain dirt on Hillary Clinton. A meeting attended, by the way, by Jared Kushner and campaign chair Paul Manafort. Now, you as a citizen, you should expect a much higher standard of truth than the one that the White House press secretary just enunciated. If a meeting takes place so campaign officials can get dirt on a political rival from the Russian government, describing that meeting as being about adoption and not mentioning the purpose of the meeting, it's not true. It's inaccurate. It is so misleading as to be a lie. And you, as a citizen, you have every right to wonder, why would the president hide the truth and be inaccurate about this? Why would he want to hide from you the facts of this meeting, which they insist was innocent? And, as always, what does any of this have to do with making America great again? So how does the president's just weighing in, as we learned today, square with what we've been told in the past about the formulation of that initial misleading statement? CNN's Jim Acosta is looking into this evolving storyline from the White House.
Yes, the White House said the president was involved in the crafting of a misleading statement that initially obscured the true nature of his son Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer during the campaign.
There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
The questions came after a Washington Post story reporting that the president dictated the statement released July 8th for Trump Jr., then inaccurately claimed the meeting was focused on Russian adoptions. We primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children that was active and popular with American families years ago and was since ended by the Russian government. 3 days after that statement, Trump Jr. released 4 pages of his own emails showing the Russian attorney planned to provide information that, quote, would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. Talking to reporters on Air Force One the next day, the president was still talking up the adoption explanation, saying they talked about the adoption stuff, which was actually a big thing at the time, but nothing happened. A story he was still using at a news conference the following day.
I guess they talked about, as I see it, they talked about adoption and some things. Adoption wasn't even a part of the campaign. But nothing happened from the meeting. Zero happened from the meeting. And honestly, I think the press made a very big deal over something that really a lot of people would do.
Say something. Asked about that initial misleading statement from Donald Trump Jr., White House outside counsel Jay Sekulow insisted the president was not involved.
That statement was, by the way, I wasn't involved in the statement drafting at all, nor was the president. I'm assuming that was between Mr. Donald Trump Jr., between Don Jr., and his lawyer. I'm sure his lawyer was involved. That's how you do it. And you know that. And so to put this on the president, I think is just absolutely incorrect.
Leaders from both parties say the president's involvement in his son's statement is yet another concern for the Russia investigation.
If it's true, I think it is of serious concern, but we don't know that it is.
If you'd had the emails available to you, you would understand that the whole meeting wasn't about adoption, that the email chain shows that it was about the Russian government wanting to help the Trump campaign. I don't think the statement helped Don Jr. I don't know what role the president played, if any. Here's what I would suggest, that when you put out a misleading statement, it's going to be hard to convince people to stop looking at other things.
The other big question lingering here at the White House is whether the president would sign a bill that would limit his ability to ease sanctions on Russia. Today, the White House said the president would sign that legislation. Congressional leaders were not very concerned the president would veto the bill. The measure has enough support in Congress to override any veto. And Jake, getting back to Donald Trump Jr.'s statement, for all of the talk about the new chief of staff here bringing order and discipline to the White House, there's another thing that's in short supply over here, and that's honesty. Jake?
Jim Acosta, thank you so much. Let's turn now to Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, whose new book is rattling more than a few cages today. It is titled Conscience of a Conservative, a Rejection of Destructive Politics and a Return to Principle. Senator, thanks so much for being here. I have a different Conscience of a Conservative book at home by Barry Goldwater.
Like that one.
Barry Goldwater. It looks a lot like this one. Obviously, the content very different. Congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you.
I want to get to that in a second, but first, let's start with this news. The Washington Post reporting and the White House confirming that President Trump played a role in drafting this initial misleading statement about Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians. What's your reaction?
I was surprised to hear that, but I know that the committees of jurisdiction, the Senate Intelligence Committee on a bipartisan basis is looking at this, as they should, and I'm sure Bob Mueller and others will as well. So, but it was a bit of a surprise.
Well, what about the fact that you have the president's lawyer going out there and telling people he did not play any role at all in the drafting of the statement, and now we're told that he did, and then also just the issue of the fact that the statement was misleading. It said it was just about adoptions, when obviously we know, as Lindsey Graham just said, that the purpose of the meeting was to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Does this White House have a huge credibility gap?
Well, I would agree with Lindsey in that regard. It's tough to tell people not to look elsewhere if they don't believe that you're giving the full story. But we'll leave it to the committees of jurisdiction. I'm glad we have a bipartisan committee looking into this, and the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they're committed to do it, and others are as well. So,
Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, was asked today if the credibility gap, these transparency and honesty issues, were hurting the Republican agenda. Take a listen to what she had to say.
I think what's hurting the legislative agenda is Congress's inability to get things passed.
What do you think?
Well, that's a pretty fair criticism. You know, first and foremost, it's our responsibility to pass things. We, I think, have reached the limit of what we can do on health care with just our party. And so we're going to be reaching across the aisle, and perhaps we should have started that way. But that's where we're going.
What do you think of the new Chief of Staff, retired Marine General?
I'm glad he's there.
Yeah.
I think it's been a good start, and obviously the measures that have been taken so far, I think, will give us more confidence that we'll see a little less chaos over there, and that'll help. That'll help.
Let's turn to your book. You have a comment in here which was really fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of criticism about the president and his behavior and how Republicans, conservatives specifically, have dealt with him. At one point you write, quote, "To carry on in the spring of 2017 as if what was happening was anything approaching normalcy required a determined suspension of critical faculties and tremendous powers of denial." It's a pretty strong thing to say. Yeah. What do you think Republicans, conservatives, Americans should be doing?
Well, there are two parts of conservatism. The first, I would argue, is policy. We've always adhered to limited government, economic freedom, individual responsibility. Barry Goldwater in 1960 felt that the party was straying from those principles, and that's why he wrote the original Conscience of a Conservative. I think we're facing a similar crisis now, where we've kind of, as Republicans, taken up an unfamiliar banner that this populism and in some cases xenophobia, anti-immigration, protectionism. That's not familiar to us, and I don't think that is a governing philosophy. So on the policy side, I think we have an issue. But also, being conservative means, particularly in foreign policy, that you're steady and that you're measured in your use of diplomacy and force and predictable, and that we embrace our allies and recognize our enemies. And that, I think, has been lacking, and I'm concerned about that.
I've heard from many Republicans on this show and also just talking in the green room who think that, in fact, the president's point of view is embracing our enemies and giving the stiff arm to our allies in a lot of ways.
Well, for those of us who were raised, in the Cold War and having the Soviet Union and now Russia adopting some of the same attitudes as the Soviet Union, when that was the existential threat, and now to be seen as being more friendly or more trusting, and to distrust our own institutions of government, our intelligence communities, just seems foreign to us, and I think it should seem foreign to us. And I think we need, when we see that, to speak up more often.
Senator, stick around. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about your book. Stay with us.
Aaron Burnett out front. Stories that matter.
You've got the money and you've got the passion, but how do you actually make a difference?
From the people
media have even been feverishly looking for alternative suspects in the hack of the DNC, so as to prove Russia was not behind what the intelligence community insists it was. One of those bogus suspects was a young man who worked at the DNC named Seth Rich, who was tragically murdered. Media vassals for President Trump have, without consideration or of conscience or fact, have smeared this young man with no evidence. Today, an explosive lawsuit was filed against Fox News and Fox News reporter Malia Zimmerman and GOP donor Ed Butowski, charging that the White House worked with Fox News and a wealthy Republican donor to concoct this untethered conspiracy theory.
The unsolved murder of former DNC staffer Seth Rich continues to get a huge amount of attention.
It was an explosive Fox News storyline built on falsehoods and later retracted.
Turns out it wasn't the Russians. It was this young guy.
It was not, but that did not seem to matter. A new lawsuit filed today, however, says the White House and a wealthy Trump supporter were behind the Fox News smear of the late Seth Rich, working to craft a story that, the lawsuit claims, would, quote, help put to bed speculation that President Trump colluded with Russia. a claim Fox News and the White House deny.
The president had no knowledge of the story, and it's completely untrue that he or the White House involvement in the story.
With the totality of everything else that I found in this case,
the plaintiff is Rod Wheeler, a Fox News contributor and former detective who was hired to investigate the murder of Rich by Trump supporter Ed Butowski, also a Fox commentator who paid for the investigation on behalf of the victim's family. According to the complaint, both men met with White House officials to discuss the story in April.
Production of journalism is not always a beautiful thing to behold, and in this case it was a particularly ugly instance.
As first reported by NPR's David Folkenflik, Wheeler filed the lawsuit this morning claiming Fox had falsely attributed quotes about the investigation to him, quote, because that is the way the president wanted the article. Butowski denies the allegations, telling CNN the lawsuit is BS. But Wheeler provides as evidence a litany of text messages and emails exchanged with Butowski.
You may get allegations about stories being misreported all the time. What you don't tend to have is almost a blow-by-blow documentary account of what occurred.
May 14th, a voicemail message from Butowski to Wheeler.
I got a note that we have the full attention of the White House on this, and tomorrow, let's close this deal.
This after allegedly sending a text to Wheeler. The president just read the article. He wants the article out immediately. It's now all up to you. When asked about the exchange, Butowski tells CNN he was joking. Enter then White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, who was asked for White House reaction after this false story broke that Seth Rich may have been behind the leaks.
I'm not aware of. I generally, I don't get updates on former DNC staffers. I'm not aware of that.
What Spicer didn't mention? The meeting he had with Butowski and Wheeler about the story the month prior. The family of Seth Rich has been tormented by all this smearing. Today they said, quote, we're hopeful that this brings an end to what has been the most emotionally difficult time in our lives and an end to conspiracy theories surrounding our beloved Seth.
And our thoughts and prayers are with Seth Rich's family. I want to give you a shot right now of a live look at Capitol Hill, where the Senate has just started voting on President Trump's nominee to replace fired FBI Director James Comey. We'll bring you that story after the break.
Choose to go, to indulge your curiosity, explore a new road.